the first highlight of the evening. And I'll read Rob. I'm assuming Rob is here. Just double check. Yes, he's here.
Yes,
Awesome.
I am. Hopefully you can hear me.
Lovely, loud and clear, Rob. Good to see
Great.
you. Awesome.
Likewise.
So I'll start reading Rob's bio, and then we start the conversation. So Rob James is a board-level technology executive with over 20 years of experience across the public and commercial sectors, with particular experience in the IT, telecommunications, gaming, entertainment, trading, and retail industries, and managing budgets of up to 700 million per annum. Most recently, Rob was on the executive team at TPG Telecom, a top 30 ASX listed company, as the Group Chief Digital and Information Officer. His responsibilities include all aspects of technology and digital across brands within the group. Prior to this, Rob was the Group Chief Technology Officer for Qantas, where he looked after all aspects of the airline, including international, domestic, loyalty, and Jetstar. So Rob is currently an independent consultant providing expertise and advice and service to some of the largest organizations across the globe, across various sectors. Last but not least, Rob was voted number 8 CIO in Australia in 2016 and top 50 in 2021 by CIO magazine. On the personal front, I must reveal that Rob, before his lifetime as tech executive, he was actually a professional musician and he used to play the piano. I'm assuming he still plays the piano, but maybe not professionally anymore. So, so on behalf of the Mindful CIO community, thanks so much, Rob, for saying yes to have a conversation. So thanks for your time. Thanks for being here.
No problem. Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, everyone. It's good to be here, and it's great to hear some of the introductions earlier on and who's on the call. So glad to meet you all.
Lovely, thank you. So Rob, let's start with a little bit of a journey. Your story. A short, reasonably concise way. How did you become, a board level senior tech executive? Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, sure, Natalie. I think you kind of summarised my journey a little bit already in my bio. But look, I've been a technologist for probably more than 20 years. 25 years, if not more than that. But I started my background in software engineering. I moved to architecture. I was very technically orientated. I think my interest was always the technology side of any business. So how business problems would be solved through technology solutions, and how to actually get involved and contribute to that. It was always very exciting for me. I've always been fairly industry agnostic. So, I've been in everything from building commodities trading platforms to automotive content businesses, digital businesses, and like you mentioned, like in airlines and in telcos more recently. So I've been very agnostic in the types of industries I've worked in, but it's always been around technology, and probably more recently skewing more towards business and digital platforms. But that's always the thing that's been most of interest to me. And I've also had exposure to startups. So I had my own startups back in probably 20 years ago, around the 2000 period. Also been involved in other startups, so that was very exciting. So I've done everything from, I guess, like I said, startups through to executive roles and board position roles at the other end of the spectrum. And, my executive career really started about 13, 14 years ago. I took on a role as the CTO for the Star Casino Group. So I ran a lot of the technology strategy there. I moved into sports betting. So interesting to have John Tooth on the call. So we come from similar backgrounds there. So I came on board as the CIO for William Hill Sports Betting, which was basically the William Hill business from the UK came out and acquired 3 businesses in Australia, which was Sportingbet, Centrebet, and the Tom Waterhouse Group. And they wanted someone reasonably independent to head up the technology part of that business. And that was really exciting because that was it wasn't a startup. It almost felt like a startup, had that kind of that feel to it, but it was actually had some good backing behind it, which was great. So, and then from there, I took on the role at Qantas, which was the group CTO role, looking after pretty much everything technology-wise except the operations of technology for the group. And the group was, both the international and domestic airlines, as well as the frequent flyer loyalty business and the Jetstar, the low-cost carrier. And that was, again, really interesting, really fun. Lots of systems, legacy systems, such as we had 2 mainframes there at the time, and a lot of also modern systems, building our own flight planning system on the AWS cloud, which I was very proud of being part of. And, even at my time there, we ran a huge transformation program to move all of the technology platforms into the public cloud. And, that project I kicked off, and I moved on since there, but, looking at it today in 2023, I think there's only 1 mainframe left. Everything else has been moved into the public cloud there, which was really exciting outcome for there. And then most recently I joined Vodafone as their group CIO, and then I was part of the merger with TPG Telecom and took on the group Chief Digital and Information Officer role there. So I ran everything technology-wise for the group there, and more interestingly, I was also running all the digital channels. So all the customer-facing systems when it came to provisioning new services for all the brands and sub-brands for, TPG, iiNet, Vodafone, et cetera. So that was really fun engagement as well. But I think for me, back in 2021, after we got through the merger, I realized that, I wanted to do something a little bit different and start my own thing. So that's where I am today. So, yep, I'm an independent consultant working for various organizations from, very large multinationals. I'm doing some work for some governments around the world as well as some SMEs and smaller organizations where I provide things like virtual CIO services and just assisting with things like strategy, etc. So, yeah, it's been quite a varied career. I think lots of different industries. I love the variety of work, and that's probably what really motivates me with what I do today as well. Like, almost every day is a different client that I'm working with, so I'm working in different areas. So, yeah, I've had quite a varied background.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Rob. There is so much energy in there, right? And I remember when we spoke on the phone, you saying that you're very passionate about, innovation, and you mentioned startup a couple of times. So I can imagine that with this new chapter in your career, you have so much more freedom, flexibility, and interesting work. And as you said, you being industry agnostic must be really exciting. But before we go to the new chapter, I'm actually curious to learn more. Given the theme of the session today is the CIO's challenge in transforming culture. And I remember you mentioned with the merge, some of the challenges you face were dealing with teams from, TPG, where most of the work was actually done in-house. And then you had Vodafone with lots of, dealing with vendors and outsourcing partners, and those different mindsets around ownership and so on. So any comments around that, getting people in the right roles? That's something else that you mentioned as well. Any thoughts that comes to mind?
Yeah, just to tell that story, because I think that was an interesting experience to be exposed to. Being part of Vodafone's IT group, as everyone knows, different organizations have very different approaches to IT, from being heavily outsourced to totally insourced and everything in between, as well as how you think about your technology stack and what you're building and versus what you're buying, etc. So, Vodafone traditionally had a very strong outsourced relationship with a number of managed service providers. And so therefore the shape of IT within Vodafone was very much about capabilities around architecture and delivery. So they were the core functions that existed in IT. Whereas TPG Telecom was very different. Like you said, they built a lot of their own technology. They built their own platforms. They had very, very little relationships with third parties and external vendors. And that was, I guess, built a lack of trust in their culture when they did engage with third parties. And I think trying to bring those two organizations together was very complex when you considered the cultural aspects of what the new IT organization was going to look like. And I think it was interesting because, anyone that knows TPG and their history would know that TPG are kind of notoriously known for running a lot of their technology on the smell of an oily rag. And in many ways, when we brought the two organizations together, we were kind of concerned about that because we felt that the people would be disenfranchised in looking after their systems and platforms and what they actually, and how that represented itself in the culture of the organization. But it was really interesting because when we looked at the two cultures, there was interesting things that came out of TPG because people were end-to-end responsible for platforms. They had end-to-end ownership. They had that true passion for the platform to look after it, to make sure that it was operating and running. Whereas on the Vodafone side of things, because there was relationships with third parties, there was a lot of passing the buck. There was no one that owned platforms end to end. And trying to bring those together was challenging, because when we looked at building a new culture for the TPG Telecom that we were creating, we started off saying, well, why don't we just take the best of both worlds and get rid of the worst of both worlds? But I think that limited us into many ways. And what we actually wanted to do was just say, we have an opportunity to create the best culture we possibly can now. We've got a clean sheet of paper. So how do we do that? By actually, trying to build that into the organizations, the IT organizations, ways of working, the operating model, how we structure ourselves as well. And I think there was a lot of learnings that came out of that, and we could spend all night talking about them. But I think the first place we started is to make sure that we had a leadership team that were bought into that cultural shift that we're trying to bring in, and also making sure that the leadership team was well represented by the two former organizations. So I very much had a split executive team or leadership team that was reporting up to me, where there was literally 30% Vodafone people, 30% TPG people, and 30% were brand new. So we made sure that, we did have a good cross-pollination of the background that we had coming from both organizations. So it was a challenge, and it was a fun problem to solve, though.
Thanks for sharing, Rob. And I imagine that having a good representation of both organizations in the leadership team kind of addressed that concern that you mentioned of the feeling of them being feeling that they were taken over. So, having representatives in the leadership team. Awesome. So many things that I could drill down into. Maybe I wonder if you had to, and putting you on the spot, Rob, we haven't spoke about that, but if you had to share, one thing that you think, you did really well, and maybe one thing that if you had the chance to go back, you would have done slightly different in these, influencing the culture with that merge. Does anything comes to mind kind of, or maybe you can write an article later and share with us.
No, I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, it's a really good question. I think, there was lots of things that we did well. I think, not to blow my own trumpet, but just, I think we did things well in regards to making sure we put right people in the right roles, and not to do that as just a figurehead exercise that we felt like, oh, we should put a certain person in a role because that's, the right thing for the previous organization. We did what was right for the current organization. I think had I had my time again, there's probably a couple of things that I think we could have improved. So one is to be much more intentional and deliberate with the strategy. So in many ways, when you're trying to bring this culture together, and every organization does this, because to get the buy-in of the culture within the group, you want everyone involved in it. But that takes time, to get everyone's feedback, to get everyone involved, to everyone contribute, takes time. And you're trying to organically create and shape a culture into a certain direction, but to have everyone participate in it, which is a great thing to do, but it just slows you down. It slows you down, and what you end up starting to do is building in bad behaviors that you have to fix up later. So in many ways, I think if we were much more intentional and deliberate in where we were trying to shape the organization, still have people participate in it, but I think we would have got to an outcome quicker. And then the other thing is that, and this is maybe a generic thought around, it's not necessarily what happens when you merge organizations, but I think putting right people in right roles also means that you make mistakes, and you sometimes have wrong people in those roles, and making intentional decisions about that sooner than later as well. I think that, you should be able to have the ability to try things and test them, but when you see that they're not working, you do need to, shuffle the decks a little bit, maybe sooner in the process. And I think that's particularly important when you've done a merger and you're creating teams, that there is an opportunity to maybe spend 6 months settling the teams in and moving things around, rather than behave in a traditional way where you might give it longer time. So I think those two things would have meant that, we probably would have had the culture come together much quicker. And And I use the word culture, but really what I'm talking about is the behaviors of the people in the organization when it comes to culture.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I usually share warm up handout. I think I share with you as well. So a couple of questions for the group to think about. And the question that we had, what are the behaviors or mindsets that are working for you, the ones that are not working, and how would you like to change? Because the culture in the end of the day is really about behaviors and mindsets, right? Cool. So I mean, we can get back to the culture topic, but I would love to shift to maybe to this new chapter in your career, Rob. So tell us a little bit about the challenges and the joys of being an independent consultant. You already touched on already, but after being such a senior leader in such large blue chip companies, now doing your own thing and having that freedom and flexibility, I'm sure it comes with a price as well. But yeah, if you could share a little bit about the joys and the challenge of being an independent consultant now.
Well, the challenge is making sure that you're busy enough. That's always a challenge. And I think, and to be, I guess, frank about that, I do feel that I'm busy enough, but sometimes wonder if I'm busy enough working on the right things. So, you can obviously, you take on clients and do projects, and then sometimes reflect whether that was, a benefit to actually what I could actually contribute to. But I think the joys of it, and I think, Natalie, when we spoke about this, when we got together, I said the same thing, which is that, I kind of reflected after my role at Vodafone TPG on why I got into what I was doing. And I was doing what I was doing because I was passionate about technology. I love the idea of about how you could use technology to solve problems. I started my career as a builder, building things with technology. And, I love the idea of how in an opportunity where I could, be an independent consultant for myself, I can focus on technology and I don't have to worry about some of the other parts of my role when I'm a CIO. And look, I won't beat around the bush, as a CIO, particularly an organization like Vodafone, I had, roughly around 1,000 people sitting under my organization. There's a lot of people problems that you need to deal with, and you spend a lot of your time doing that. And that's not enjoyable when you're there to actually solve, technology problems. I think the other thing I love about what I'm doing at the moment is the variety of work. Like I said, every day I could be working on something different. One of my clients is a large manufacturer. So, I'm working on manufacturing problems. Then I'm, working in retail. I've been doing a large cloud transformation for a government. So, like every day it's like a different problem context to solve. And that's fun, right? Because I'm not dealing with the same thing every day. It just makes it far more interesting. And I think the other thing about it, and this is again being very, very transparent and honest about this, is when you're an independent consultant, you can avoid the company politics that comes with a role. So, I don't have to be sensitive about saying the wrong thing because I need to keep somebody on side. I don't have to be sensitive about maybe positioning statements in a particular way because my audience might be different. I basically tell my clients as it is today, and it's up to them if they want to listen. I've got no ulterior agenda. I'm not trying to, further my career within that organization. I'm just trying to solve the problem for them as they requested me to do it. So I enjoy that part of it as well. So, like I said, I just tell them as it is. And if they want to listen, great. If they don't, I did the best I could.
I can see why you smile, Rob. The less need to be political and more opportunity to exercise one of your strengths, which is creativity, right? So that's definitely something that sounds like gives you real joy. Okay, so shall we move to the FIRE story? So you've been involved, you mentioned startups a number of times. So FIRE story, for those who are not familiar, I think I shared the article last month as a bit of a heads up. So Australian Cloud AI and Bushfire Intelligence Platform. So how did you get involved? What would you like to share with us about that initiative?
Yeah, sure. So I think like probably many people on this call, you have your job and then you have the interests that you get involved in. And I've been on several boards, whether they're ASX boards or even just startup boards, but I've also been involved in a number of organizations just on their technology advisory boards. And FireStory was one of those. So, FireStory was actually a platform that was developed by a consulting company that I had a relationship with called Kablemo. So they basically built this after the events of the very tragic 2019, 2020 bushfires. And, they were a bunch of technologists that were really passionate to see if they could solve or how could they contribute to solving the problem. So, they knew they weren't going to hold the end of a hose, but they knew that they could potentially, use some of their skills and capabilities to introduce technology into this. And, in 2020, they started building a platform. They consequently have implemented it into a number of fire agencies around Australia. And then I was part of that advisory board, and it got to the point last year where, the individuals within that organization decided, look, we need someone to take fire stories to the next level. We need to find some more customers. We need to take this international and global. And, for myself, yes, I'm doing my consulting practice, but I don't want to limit myself. I want to see what other projects I can get involved in. And that I intentionally wanted to get involved with a number of startups. And so this is one of a couple that I'm involved in. But they basically asked me if I could take on Firestory, what vision I had for the platform and the product. And so that's what I've been doing right now. So look, I see it's exciting. It's basically Firestory is a platform that is utilised by the firefighting agencies, predominantly around Australia. There's about 3 clients in Australia at the moment. But what it does is it's actually trying to streamline how technology can help the firefighting community in dealing with some of those disastrous scenarios. And it's not just about managing an incident. It's all about what we call this 360 degree of bushfire intelligence. So that all starts with pre-season planning. So you understand through satellite imagery and through models that we build on what the fuel cover is across particular regions, so that the firefighting agencies can plan their backburning activities before, through the cooler months. And then it goes into the next phase where, for early ignition or what we can pick up through, again, satellite imagery or through other camera technology around when sparks or ignition points start an incident, to keep an eye on it before it gets too big. And then also managing the incident itself, making sure we understand where, fire prediction burn patterns are going. Is there any critical infrastructure such as mobile phone towers, electricity lines, more importantly, houses and community? Are they in line of any of the potential burn patterns? Also then helping to deploy the assets such as, fire trucks and planes, etc., to fight the fires. And then finally, it also looks after the post-incident learning. So, what do we take from a season and what we've learned from those burns to help plan for the next season? So, the platform is something that has pretty much implemented all of that to a certain degree, and we're continually improving it. And what's exciting now is that we're taking the platform internationally. So we're talking to customers in North America, across USA and Canada, as well as in Europe, because we do feel that, we have really built a really interesting platform to help service an industry where there is technology solutions, but they're very fragmented. So we're trying to bring that all into a single pane of glass to help them make decisions much quicker. So yeah, it's exciting platform. And you've heard me use the word passion. Yes, I'm very passionate about technology, and what I love is working with a team that are just as passionate about the problem they're solving in this space.
Fascinating. Thanks for sharing, Rob. So I think a great example of tech used for good, right? Clearly. Hello, Ram. Good to see you. Welcome. Better late than ever. And Liz, I'm assuming you are here. You're just not connected on your laptop. My both former Accenture colleagues. Rob, there's so much going on, right? So much on your plate. So you are working with boards, you have the startup passion projects, clients across the globe. So one thing that is very important that we advocate, probably because of my own background of nearly burning out myself in my consulting days, it's self-care. So what would you say that you use? What are your rituals, your routines to keep yourself fit, not just physically, but mentally, energetically, emotionally, all of the above? What do you do to keep yourself in check and recharge, reset?
Yeah, Look, I don't have one thing, but I think the one thing that is important, regardless of what those activities are, is to be able to switch off. I think that's eternally important. And, you know, often we have our 9 to 5 day or 6 to 6 day, whatever it is. And, you know, you do need to get to a point where you just switch off and not think about things and not let them, you know, get you stressed out, etc. And that's hard to do, right? You know, I think it was really interesting to see you do your mindful exercise at the start of this session, and it's good to have practices like that. I think for me, you know, we hear this a lot, and I find that it's important for me as well, is to keep to a fitness routine, because that keeps the brain focused more than anything. You know, I like to go for a bike ride, hit the gym, go for a walk, but almost anything to just remain active. And I find that the more I do that, the more my brain can remain focused, but it's also easier to switch off. And, you know, and you mentioned earlier, yes, I was a musician for many years before I got into technology. And I think it's important to have other interests and hobbies. And I still do enjoy music. I like listening to music and watching live music, and yes, still occasionally playing, and it's a good way to switch off. But I think that you need to have those kind of hobbies or activities. And again, I think that we hear it a lot, and it's hard to do, but to keep up that fitness routine, you know, whatever it is, even if it's to go for a walk, but you do need to do it, does help. And when, you know, I notice myself that if I go through a period that I'm very busy, that I'm not doing it, my level of focus and level of attentiveness actually does go down. So, you know, I do try and keep on top of that.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, Rob. And I've been stalking you on Twitter, so I've seen you talking about, I mean, it's been a while, but go-karting and fishing, deep water fishing, and what else? No skydiving. Kidding. Cool. All right. So thanks for sharing. So I think yeah, keeping fit, exercise is definitely something that is good for mind and body for sure. Mindful leadership. So of course, the mindful CIO, as you mentioned, we did a short mindfulness practice, and mindful leadership is something that we advocate. Many people, I remember Hani, when he was here the first time, he said like, well, this mindful leadership sounds like servant leadership. It's how different is that? So it's really all around the same lines, no compassion leadership or servant leadership or mindful leadership. But when you hear the term mindful leadership, what comes to you, or maybe a little bit of your leadership style, whatever you want to talk around those lines, Rob, please.
Yeah, I think it's a really good topic to talk about. I think for me personally, it's, when you're a leader and you have a team around you, it's really important to be aware of your people. And that for me is being more mindful to your role. And so that means about, being not only aware of them and their conditions professionally, but, what's actually going on in their lives personally. And I don't mean to be intruding on their personal lives, but you want to be at least sensitive to what's going on. So, the EQ side of the role is very, very important. And I think that when you start to understand, particularly your immediate team much more personally, and what's actually driving them, what's concerning them, you can also start to think about how you can combine people in your team to make them work well together and get the most out of them. You want to understand what's creating friction in individuals and teams versus what works well in individuals and teams. Again, how do you put those individuals together to deliver an outcome that you may be searching for, and don't force some of those situations. Like, I think sometimes, we look towards our teams and we specifically need to get some teams to work on a particular solution, but they may not be the right people individually to work on it, or even collectively to work on it. And sometimes to think outside of the box, to actually get people out of their comfort zone and work on a problem that may not belong to them, something that they could start to contribute in a very different way. I think, when I put a team together, I'm quite, I guess, intentionally looking to try and put different personalities or different styles of working together. I like that because I think it does challenge individuals in the teams in different ways. And sometimes they're not so comfortable in those situations early on, but they do find their groove, and you get the best out of people when doing that. So I think number one for me is being just that aware of the people in your team and what their strengths are, and not only their strengths and weaknesses professionally, but like I said, personally, in their personality, in their working styles, in their leadership styles, and how do you actually combine those in the best ways possible to get the outcomes for your organization.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I remember when we spoke on the phone talking about thinking styles as well, and so working styles, thinking styles, taking all of that in consideration. Awesome. Usually I ask a question, Rob, about what's the declaration of the manifesto that you identify yourself the most. I can't remember if I shared with you, so I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, you did.
Yeah, I did. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
so
I had a read of them. They're very good.
Cool. Okay, good. So, which of those do you resonate the most, if any, Rob?
Yeah, I think it was like, by the way, great manifesto, and I think they're all very important. You know, my thoughts out of some of them is that they could be challenging to try and adopt and trying to implement within.
Aspirational. It's aspirational. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great. And I think the other thing is that, you know, when I was reading through them, that some mean different things to different people, and some could be very personal. So, you know, when I think about the one around preventing burnout, you know, burnout to one person is not burnout to the next person. They could mean very, very different things. And also that the idea of promoting a healthy culture, that, you know, a healthy culture could mean different things to different people. And the other one that I thought that would be also challenging to implement, and maybe for certain situations like long working days. Yeah, we love to avoid it, but sometimes they just have to be there, right? You know, particularly if you're in a crisis. So I think it's about, you know, when you think about long working days, is to how do you manage a long working day when you have to have a long working day. But I think when I went through them, there's probably a couple that resonated to me, and the reason they resonated to me is that, you know, part of what I do today is that I do coach leaders in my current role as well. And, you know, there's two that probably stood out for me and how they personally connect for me. So one was about promotion of human skills and EQ. So, you know, I talked a little bit about that in the previous questions, but, you know, that one is personally important to me. I think, you know, like I said, you know, connecting to teams on a personal level gives everyone more skin in the game. You know, they feel more vested in the team and more, you know, responsible in the success of the team. You know, I do recall that I think one of the best leaders I ever worked with was quite brilliant at this. She was a CEO and had a lot of responsibilities on her shoulders, but every meeting I ever had with her, she spent the first 10 minutes of that meeting asking about me personally, about my family, my personal life, how I was feeling about the role. You know, it was all, you know, personal questions rather than, you know, is the project on time? And I think that was really, really powerful about her being able to, you know, engage with the team and get success that she wanted from the team. And I'm not sure if anyone's heard of Project Aristotle, which was a Google initiative. It's a little bit of nodding of heads, but I think this is, when I think about, you know, this human skills and the EQ element, you know, go and look it up, Project Aristotle. And basically the very short version of this is that, you know, Google went away and said, you know, we're doing, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of projects a year. Some are successful, some are huge failures. Surely we've got enough data points to try and figure out what makes a project successful so we can bottle it and make sure that more projects are successful. And this was a really interesting, you know, Google being essentially a data company, you know, went deep into the data and looked at the data and inspected all the angles of data and couldn't find any common patterns on what made a project successful versus a project that wasn't successful. And it was actually an individual, one of the graduates that was actually, you know, working on the project, that decided they weren't going to take a data-led approach. They actually wanted to just observe teams to see what was different with the successful teams versus the others. And the one common thing that came out was the EQ side of the team, that you know, the projects that failed seemed to have really good rigor and structure in, for example, their meeting culture. They would have a set agenda. They would stick to that agenda. They would, you know, make sure there's actions at the end, you know, which we all think are great practices. But the teams that had really strong personal interconnection spent most of their meeting time just talking about each other personally, what they did on the weekend, you know, what was worrying them, etc. And what came out of that is people cared for each other. So they were vested in the success of each other in the team because they were personally connected. So anyway, it's just a really good example and a study that performed that sort of backs that one. So, I highly recommend, look it up, Project Aristotle. But the other one that sort of resonated for me was, the supporting of leaders' growth. I think that's important in an organization. And to specifically talk about why I think that's important is that many organizations think the way they should reward good work in an organization is to promote our individual contributors into managers. And that's how we are sort of taught, or we see that our careers should progress if we want to move up the ladder. But I think that is what's really missed there, is that that's not how you build leaders, right? In fact, that's the worst way to build a leader, is to get an individual contributor that's great at, building things or getting outcomes, and suddenly telling them to manage people. And in fact, personally, I know, and many of you might come across this as well, is that particularly when you work with developers or development teams, developers come in as junior developers and work their way through to senior developers. And then they're like, what's my next step? I want to be a dev manager, or I want to manage a team. And you have to make them aware that that's a very, very different role, that you will now not be writing code as much as you used to write code. You're probably going to spend most of your time dealing with people. And is that what you got into this profession to do? And so, I think there's many organizations there's some organizations that have thought about this and think about, how can we move those individual contributors into much more senior roles? And we do see some interesting patterns emerging from some of the technology companies on how do they do that. So they don't become, managers as such, but they start to become more senior developers that can influence strategy and whatnot. But I think many organizations are still struggling with that. And, the amount of times I've promoted a developer or a senior developer into a dev manager, and then they've asked me to step back into into a senior developer role, it's probably happened more often than not. So I think there needs to be more done around how do you actually support leaders to grow, to become leaders, or how do you support individuals to be able to find a career path for them to progress in and still be happy in the roles that they're doing. So I think they're the two that I'd call out that mean a lot to me.
100%. Couldn't agree more, Rob. Of course, I'm biased, but also with my experience coaching leaders as well, I can see that happening a lot. And the lack of a technical career path. Often people go like, I want to manage, but they're not clear on what that new role would entail. Amazing. I think we probably should wrap up soon. So any final words, Rob? Maybe a leadership lesson, or a mantra, quote, a story, however would you like to use our last few minutes?
Sure. Look, I think you've heard me use the word passion a lot when it comes to the role or technology. And I think that's really important. I always have had a little bit of a mantra where I used to say to my team, passion prevails. At the end of the day, if you're a big believer in what you're doing and you do it because you love it and you stay committed to it and you're passionate enough about it and work hard, you will succeed. I think that, you could be technically capable, the most technically capable person in the organization, but if you don't love what you do, you're going to struggle. You're really going to struggle. And your team's going to struggle, and your organization's going to struggle with you as well. I think you really have to love what you do. So, find the thing that you love to do and be passionate about it, and you will be successful. So hopefully that means something to somebody.
Brilliant. It definitely does. Thanks so much, Rob. So thanks on behalf of the community again for your time, for your preparation, for being here with us. And I'm not sure if you need to dash off or if you're happy to hang out a little bit further. The plan, as I said before, will be now to move into, probably we'll go just with 2 breakout rooms and have a bit of a discussion to digest everything that you share with us and to reflect on those 4 questions that we shared before.
Thank you for that. I might drop off. It's been a very long day and I haven't had a break yet. I need to have some dinner. So,
of course.
but thank you. And thank you for having me. It was, I hope it was a useful conversation.
100%. Absolutely. Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much, Rob. You have a good evening. I'll catch you later.